Welcome to One Healthy World. I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. Thank you so very much for joining us. I'm in Washington, D.C. My co-host across the pond, really bringing a global look at health, is Dr. Gemma Newman in London. And Dr. Newman, today we are going to be talking about cancer and nutrition. In all honesty, I don't think that a lot of people know just how much the food that they're eating can play a role in terms of their risk for cancer. As a doctor, before we get to everything that there is on the program today, just I'm curious, humor me right up front. How often are patients surprised when you have these types of conversations with them?
Yeah, so Chuck, often patients can be quite surprised. And this is why this episode in particular is so important to me because people don't realize how powerful nutrition can be. And for people born after about 1960, about half have a lifetime risk of being diagnosed with a cancer. So this is a really important topic for everyone to know about. We'll all be affected in one way or another. And, 60 to 70% of those cancers are, in fact, potentially reversible, with about 35% of those linked very directly to diet. So we have a lot to talk about and a lot to get excited about when we think about how to prevent cancers today.
And we have a phenomenal lineup of guests joining us to help break down all of this information and help coach us up, raise our health IQs, as I like to say on the Exam Room podcast. Of course, Dr. Kristi Funk is here with us, a renowned breast cancer surgeon, a great friend of ours here at the Physicians Committee, knows more about the link between nutrition and cancer than virtually anyone that I know. Dr. Newman, Dr. Neal Barnard also will be gracing us with his presence today. He and I will be having a conversation about prostate cancer and the connection with nutrition there. Also excited to be joined by a cancer survivor turned YouTuber turned inspiration, just a phenomenal human being up in Canada, Meg Gray, aka Plant Fit Meg. She is here with us today as well. We're also going to get some really cool, simple soy recipes from our good friend, our culinary whiz, and Christine. She's here with us as well. And Lisa Simon will also be here because I know that in just a second, you and Dr. Funk will be talking about foods that can reduce the risk. Well, Lisa Simon will be talking with us about foods that increase the risk, but she's also going to show how sacrificing flavor is not the only way to save your health. You can have all of the flavor and all of the health benefits. She's going to be helping us out with that in just a little bit. But I'm really curious to hear what you and Dr. Funk have to say about what are the foods that we should be eating that can help reduce that risk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chuck. I am really excited to talk to Dr. Christie. And as you say, she is a real expert in this area. She is a board certified breast cancer surgeon. She's a best-selling author. She's an international keynote speaker. And today, she and I are going to chat about foods that we can all enjoy more of. Welcome, Dr. Christie.
Oh, Dr. Newman, thank you for having me. And I have
Oh,
to say, you make me sound even smarter than I might be just with your gorgeous accent.
well, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you. No, I'm really excited about this because, as I say, so many of my patients are affected by cancer, and so many of us in our lifetimes will be affected one way or another. Tell me, in your experience and from the research that you've read, how can we start to mitigate those risks through the food on our plates?
So the vegetables are going to be king. And then we need to include, of course, fruits. And king of the fruits will be berries. And king of the veggies will be the cruciferous kingdom. And then I want to add some soy in there. So my top cancer fighting foods that are literally going to take estrogen, which feeds and fuels 80% of breast cancers, and cause your body to slow production and up the ante with excretion of excess estrogen. We're going to decrease angiogenesis, angio blood vessel, genesis birth, the birth of new blood flow, which any cancer that aspires to be bigger than the tip of a ballpoint pen, be it prostate or breast or colon, what have you, must create angiogenesis, its own little secret blood supply that helps it proliferate and grow, and then boom, exit strategies straight out those same blood vessels to the liver, to the bone, to the brain, right? So your foods can be anti-angiogenic and they can be anti-IGF-1. This is a growth hormone, the biggest growth promoter that runs around our bodies, thankfully, because it turns over cells, which we need like 50 billion new ones a day. But when it's in excess, it's still going to scream at things to grow plaque, grow cancer. So the foods you're eating, particularly vegetables, and chief among them are going to be cruciferous veggies. I'm also madly in love with the whole allium family. We're talking shallots, leeks, onions, garlic, mushrooms. A fantastic study from just this year showed an average 32% reduction in breast cancer for high versus low mushroom consumers. And tomatoes, we get lycopene in tomatoes, which has tremendous antioxidant, anti-angiogenic potential. So those are my big veggie heroes.
Fantastic. Wow, what a wonderful list. And I think what you said about cruciferous vegetables really resonated with me, because a lot of people don't really understand that, what you want to do is actually reduce the amount of new blood vessels that are forming, whilst also providing healthy blood for your normal cells. And interestingly, with cruciferous vegetables, they help you reduce the vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, which is just a lovely synchronicity. I think you just have to remember to eat your veggies, right?
Right, you eat your veggies, and all of a sudden you're helping your heart, your brain, your breast, your prostate, if you happen to have a prostate. It's really incredible how ubiquitous the beneficial effects of plants are on all of health.
I'm so glad you mentioned soy as well, because I recently read a 2019 meta-analysis on soy. It's so misunderstood. It's such a great and healthy bean, but what I want to share is that there was a massive meta-analysis of 114 studies that showed that soybeans can reduce the risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, gastric cancer, colorectal cancer, and lung cancer, as well as reducing risks of other things like diabetes and hot flushes. So, yeah, I think the soybean is very, very unfairly maligned, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. It's been vilified largely because there was a study heard around the world about mice grafted with breast cancers and then fed soy, and the cancers grew. Turns out we as humans metabolize the isoflavones in soy very differently than mice, and they never needed to graft those on mice in the first place, right, Neal? But however, we have that data, and it doesn't even translate into humans, further making the study irrelevant. But the truth is, soy in every human study ever done on breast cancer shows a between 30 and 60% reduction in breast cancer occurrence. And if you have had breast cancer, get this, estrogen positive or negative, it reduces the recurrence by 30 to 60% and the mortality on average by 30%. And that kind of speaks to the anti-carcinogenic, oxidant powers within soy that go beyond its estrogen reducing effects, because as you mentioned, it reduces the risks of a whole host of non-hormone dependent cancers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristi. And I think maybe one more thing that I thought might be helpful to talk about is those herbs and spices, right? Because they help the foods to be so delicious, but they also have their own anti-cancer properties of their own, don't they?
Oh, they absolutely do. And probably my queen would be turmeric among all of the spices. But anything that you want to throw into your food, everything from cinnamon to saffron, etc., is going to have tremendous anti-inflammatory power. And when you take away that chronic inflammation, that's just sort of the milieu in which your cells kind of have to exist, if you lower the inflammatory component in there, of which like VEGF you mentioned is a big one, you're going to allow your immune system to wake up and be able to seek out and destroy these deranged cells that are causing disease within your body, because they don't have to spend so much time just lowering the inflammation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a great point. What do you think, Chuck? Are you suitably inspired to eat your veggies?
Every time Dr. Funk speaks, I listen. What she says is the gospel of health. So I have never been more fired up to go down to the kitchen, open up the refrigerator, pull out the drawer on the crisper, and just go to town on some greens and some mushrooms and feel really good about what's happening in my life. Fascinating stuff. I absolutely love Kristi Funk. I know we're going to be bringing her back on here in just a little bit, but you guys were talking about foods that reduce the risk of cancer. Now let's kind of flip the script on that. Let's talk about foods that can actually increase the risk of cancer. Our next guest is going to do that with me. She is a registered dietitian with a special interest in plant-based nutrition and fertility. She is very well versed in all things chronic disease, including cancer. Lisa Simon here with us now with a look at the foods that increase the risk for cancer. But what we're talking about here is that you don't have to sacrifice flavor in order to save your health.
Hello, my name is Lisa Simon and I'm a registered dietitian with a special interest in plant-based nutrition. Now, when my patients ask me how they can reduce their risk of developing cancer, the first thing I will say to them is to eliminate red and processed meat from the diet. So the reason for this is because since 2015, the World Health Organization have classed processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen. And that means that there is sufficient evidence to show that processed meats cause cancer in humans. And they have classed red meat as a Group 2 carcinogen, meaning that red meat probably causes cancer in humans. And although the evidence isn't as strong as for processed meat, it's still advisable to avoid red meat. And the reason for this is because of the heme iron content. So heme iron is the type of iron found in animal products, and it is a source of oxidative stress in the body, meaning that it causes damage to cells and DNA. And not only that, but it's also involved in the formation of carcinogenic compounds. So these are found in red meat and also poultry. So although the World Health Organization has actually just classed red meat as the Group 2 carcinogen, it is likely to also apply to white meat because white meat also contains heme iron. And the compounds are formed during the heating process as well. So if you're cooking meat at high temperature, whether that's red meat or chicken or turkey, then so through baking, frying, or grilling, or barbecuing, then these carcinogenic compounds are being formed. And with processed meats, the quantity is actually really small as well. So for every 50 grams of processed meat that you eat, the risk of developing colorectal cancer increases by 18%. And 50 grams of processed meat really isn't that much. It equates to less than 2 rashers of bacon and around a quarter of a burger. So it's a common belief that you need red meat in the diet to meet your iron requirements. And actually that's not true. So although red meat does contain a lot of iron, it's in the form of heme iron, which, as I've just explained, is not a good idea. But also because once your body absorbs heme iron, which is readily absorbed, it's not very good at getting rid of it. So as it's a source of oxidative stress, you don't want a lot of heme iron building up in your body. So alternatives would be non-heme iron, which is a plant-based source of iron. And many people will argue that it's not very readily absorbed, but actually your body's really, really clever at regulating the amount of non-heme iron that it takes in. So if your supplies are plentiful, you'll absorb less. And if your supplies need a bit of a top-up, then you will absorb more. And a really good replacement for red meat and processed meat as well is tofu. So that's a form of soya bean, and it has comparable amounts of iron as red meat, as well as being packed with other really important nutrients such as fibre and phytoestrogens, which have been shown time and time again to not have any harmful effects on humans, despite the many myths around soya out there, and they're perfectly safe for men to consume as well. So with non-heme iron, you do need a little bit of help to absorb, but all you need to do is pair it with a source of vitamin C. So if you're having plenty of fruit and vegetables in your diet, then you don't need to worry about that. You know that you'll be having enough vitamin C. Other foods that are associated with an increased risk of some cancer is dairy. Now, dairy is a bit of a contentious topic because in some studies it has been shown to be protective against colorectal cancer. But the reason for that is because of the high calcium content of dairy. But you don't need to have dairy to get enough calcium in your diet. And actually, the World Cancer Research Fund has acknowledged the reduced risk of colorectal cancer with dairy consumption. However, because there is an increased risk of prostate cancer and breast cancer, it has not made any recommendations for dairy consumption. So with dairy, there are so many lovely alternatives. You can get fortified plant-based milks, and I would always say go for the fortified versions rather than the organic versions, because the fortified versions have calcium and vitamin D, which is really important in terms of cancer prevention, colorectal cancer prevention, and also protecting your bones. You can also have fortified plant-based yogurts, chia seeds, almonds and almond nut butter, leafy green vegetables. So you're looking for low oxalate leafy green vegetables, not high oxalate ones. So that would be particularly spinach and Swiss chard. However, these are still really important to include in the diet because they're a great source of nitrates, which is really important for blood vessel health and cardiovascular heart health. And if you want to reduce the oxalate content in spinach and Swiss chard, then you just need to boil it, and that will break that down for you. So there are plenty of options to replace the calcium in dairy. Also, tofu, again, is an excellent source of calcium, especially if it's calcium set. So you're looking for calcium sulfate in the ingredients. And just a portion of tofu, so that's between 80 and 100 grams, will give you up to 450 milligrams of calcium in just that serving. And for the general population who needs 700 milligrams a day of calcium, so that's the general adult population, then you're exceeding 50% of your calcium needs in just one meal or just one food. So even for people with higher calcium requirements, so for example, postmenopausal women or people with celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease, it's still really, really achievable to meet your calcium needs without having dairy.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Look forward to speaking with you again in the near future. Now, at the beginning of the show, Dr. Newman, you and Dr. Funk were talking about soy a little bit and how soy got vilified. And so I'm always curious, though, in your kitchen, do you cook? Do you use a lot of soy with the food that you make?
I love soy and I use it in many ways and I try to have it every day. So we have a lot of scrambled tofu in our house. I have edamame beans in my freezer that I can just whip out a handful and then I like to add them to my salads. I've actually got a little bit of miso paste that I love to put in my stews. So I can just dollop a bit of that in for a little bit of extra flavor. And of course, soy milk. So easy. I
See,
love soy milk.
you are miles ahead of where I think a lot of us are if we're just beginning our plant-based journey. I remember getting started and just taking a bite off of the block of tofu and was thinking like, this is the most flavorless thing in the history of ever. So I'm really excited that our culinary whiz Aunt Christine is here with us now with some really simple soy recipes that'll knock your socks off.
So many people are afraid of tofu. Let's conquer this fear. Hello, welcome to Veggie Magnifique, your go-to for holistic wellness and a healthy vegan lifestyle. Today, I'm going to share 5 ways that I love to cook tofu to make it totally delicious. The key here is that tofu is a sponge. So all the herbs and spices and flavors that you give it, it's gonna soak up and make it absolutely delicious. So you can think of tofu as a blank canvas for gastronomical gorgeousness. And it's great for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, including dessert. So here are 5 ways to make you and tofu into lovers. Number 1 is making a chocolate mousse with silken tofu. This is one of my favorite recipes. It's so rich and decadent and like 3 ingredients. So basically you put silken tofu and cocoa powder as well as a bit of maple syrup and some vanilla into a blender. You blend it up and then you pop it in the fridge for a couple hours and it makes a decadent chocolate mousse. Pot de crème, as we say. Next up is tamari marinated extra firm tofu. So this is one of my absolute favorite recipes that I make probably a couple times a week and it's very easy. Essentially you dunk your tofu in tamari or soy sauce and some sriracha if you like some heat, and then you dunk it in some nutritional yeast and maybe why not some sesame seeds, and then you either pop it in your air fryer or your oven and then it crispifies the tofu and makes it into just delicious little nuggets. I highly recommend that you use extra firm tofu for this one. Next up, we're getting breakfasty, and that is a tofu scramble. Now, a tofu scramble can be made many ways, but I really like Rainbow Plant Life's recipe. So she presses the tofu for 15 minutes, and then she whisks together her delicious sauce. And then you crumble the tofu with your hands, and then you fry the tofu with the sauce. Saute, 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 add some kala namak if you want that eggy flavor. So eggy without the cholesterol. Next up is barbecue tofu. This packs so much flavor, it's so delicious. And you really only need a few ingredients, which is of course barbecue sauce and maybe some tamari, as well as some chili garlic sauce, if you like that spiciness. And essentially all you're doing here is browning the tofu, adding in the sauce, cooking some more, and then serving immediately. This is super delicious, served on some rice with some veggies and why not some green onion. Next up is tofu tacos. Yes, you can make tacos with tofu and it's scrumptious. These spicy crumbles will melt any Mexican food loving heart. So what you do is add soy sauce, apple cider vinegar, garlic powder, chili powder, some cumin, and of course some smoked paprika. You mix these up, you pop these crumbles into a taco, and you say, hola, happiness. So there you have it, 5 easy ways to add more tofu to your life. And for those of you who thought you could never like tofu, never soy never.
Thank you so much, Anne Christine, for that. What amazing recipes. I can't wait to give those a try. And now we've got something very, very special because I get to chat to an incredible woman, Plant Fit Meg. Now, Meg is a compassionate plant-based lifestyle coach and YouTuber, and she empowers others to shift their mindset, develop healthy lifestyle patterns, and transform their lives. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about her story today. So welcome, Meg. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here to share more about my story and to show other people that change is possible.
Yeah, and I think that's so important when it comes to conversations like this, because especially when you receive a cancer diagnosis or a family member does, it can feel so overwhelming. Would you be able to share a bit about how that felt for you and a bit more about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the age of 20, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Highly unusual. Doctors were very surprised, and it was a really scary time. I was in university at the time and just doing the usual college student experience, and everything just kind of had to stop, and I had to go have treatment. I had a couple of surgeries and went through chemotherapy. And it was a really scary time. We didn't know exactly how it would play out because it was such a rare thing for someone my age to be diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And they told me I was 1 in a million. And I was like, I'd rather win the lottery, thanks. But cancer, so there you go. And my dad is a cancer survivor too. And I had watched him go through it. And he's such a funny, fun-loving person. And he just always went through it with such humor. And so I took strength from that and just did the best I could to make the best of it and get through it with as much grace and positivity as possible, despite it being a really challenging time in my life.
Meg, it's really good to talk to you again. I'm curious, being 20 years old and receiving that diagnosis, I mean, would talk to us about the emotions of that day before you even began crafting a plan to battle this beast.
It was really odd. The way I found out was really highly unusual as well, because I found out via phone call, which usually they don't do that typically. So I was actually at my boyfriend's house, who is now my husband, but was my boyfriend at the time. And his mom came into the room with the phone and was handing me the phone. Megan, there's someone on the phone for you. I'm like, why is someone calling me at Chris's house? This is odd. And they told me, a cyst that they anticipated would be benign and not have cancer within it actually was cancerous. And they told me over the phone. And the reason they did that because it was near the holidays and they didn't want the cancer center to call me and start trying to give me information before I even knew that I had diagnosis. So it was really shocking to get a phone call and not be, in a doctor's office setting. And so I remember just being in shock generally and hanging up the phone, telling my boyfriend, Chris, what was going on, and then having to go home and tell my parents and talk to them about, hey, I have cancer, and what now?
And
a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I was going to say that it always feels easier when you have some sort of plan, and when something like this happens, it's a huge shock, and then to not know exactly what's going to happen next is also really confusing and difficult. What happened next along that road for you? You were 20 at the time. Obviously,
Yeah.
now you're sharing your story with us a few years later. What happened along that journey for you?
Yeah, so before I was diagnosed, I had had a surgery to have an ovarian cyst removed. And I was just told to, put it in your 5-year plan, no biggie, you'll get it removed, you'll move on with life, and everything will be fine. And then it turned out, oh, surprise, cancer. So after that, I had to have another surgery and went through chemotherapy and was told that I wouldn't lose my hair, like, oh, you'll just have thinning, it'll be fine. Ended up losing my hair. So there were a lot of sort of difficult things along the way on top of the cancer diagnosis, and the way that it impacts your family and your loved ones is also difficult as a cancer patient to watch and deal with. And like I said, I just tried to be as positive as possible and to get through it. And once I was cancer free, I just wanted to sort of move on with my life and forget it happened, and move on from that.
When did you start putting the dots, connecting the dots that, hey, you know what, there's a lot to be said here for maybe what I'm putting into my body and my cancer risk, not just the occurrence initially, but then making sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent another recurrence?
Yeah, I really wish I had known about it sooner, honestly. I did not know about this link between lifestyle and cancer. And this is going back to 2005, 2006. So I'm very hopeful that things are changing and things are different now when people are diagnosed with cancer. And I'm hoping that they're given more information about diet and lifestyle to help them out in the process, or even to prevent before it even happens. But I didn't find out about this link until a decade later. So I had been cancer free for a decade. I was a new mom. I had a 4-month-old at home, and we were looking at our son Ryerson saying, what are we going to feed this kid? What are his first foods going to be? Is he going to be healthy, and how are we going to be healthy and have longevity? And so I started digging into it. I watched Forks Over Knives. I was doing research. How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger had come out around that time. And I decided to go vegan overnight and make the switch. And I haven't looked back.
Wow, that's a really inspirational story. So, what were your thoughts and feelings when you discovered some of the research around cancer, knowing what you had been through in the previous years?
It was really shocking to me that I just didn't have that information, and that my doctors at the time didn't have that information. I asked, why me? Why do I have cancer? And their response was very much, well, we don't really know. Sometimes it's down to genetics. And, so I just kind of figured, okay, it's my genes. My dad's a cancer survivor, and there's a lot of cancer in my family. And I just didn't recognize or know that I had so much more control potentially of potentially preventing it, or helping to treat it, or helping to be healthy after the fact.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, because sometimes, sorry, Chuck, I just wanted to say with my patients, I know that it can be overwhelming at the time that you have a diagnosis. And so, sometimes doctors or dietitians feel like, oh, I don't want to overwhelm them with too much information, which is why it's so lovely to have a discussion like this now. So for those of us who may not yet have received a cancer diagnosis, we have the time to process it all. We have the time to think about how we can introduce it into our lives, and then get inspired every day, so that we can hopefully reduce those risks, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah.
And Meg, we have about 30 seconds left here. So I got to ask you a fun one to wrap this up, because your energy is absolutely infectious. You used the word control and having control. And the
Yeah.
cool thing about eating a plant-based diet is that it is delicious, which means that control inherently is delicious. So when you are going in for that really delicious control, what are the foods that you love the most right now?
Oh my goodness. So many different foods that I've discovered and new things that I've tried over the years. Um, I think my go-to right now is my black bean mushroom burger. It's really delicious. And like Dr. Newman was saying earlier, I love a good tofu scramble. And it kind of reflects back to what Dr. Funk was saying about reducing your risk and, incorporating those soy foods and those veggies and the turmeric and really eating foods that are nourishing and healthy, but also delicious.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Meg. And that draws us really nicely onto a very quick chat that we're going to have again with Dr. Kristi, talking this time about breast cancer and dairy specifically. So, Dr. Kristi, would you be able to share some research for us that will help us to navigate that link between breast cancer and dairy?
Absolutely. So there's a powerful study that was just published in 2020 in the International Journal of Epidemiology that followed a whopping 52,795 North American women. This comes out of Loma Linda, where 29.7% of the participants were Black. So, woo, I love me a multi-ethnic study. It's a better slice of American pie, if you will. They were followed for 7.9 years, and during that time, 1,057 new breast cancers happened. When they looked at their dietary surveys, they found that the highest versus lowest dairy milk consumers had a 50% increase in breast cancer. And when you looked at the highest versus lowest overall dairy calories, so milk, butter, cheese, and eggs, no eggs, milk, butter, cheese kind of things, you had a 22% increase in breast cancer. But what happened when the median milk consumption was substituted by soy milk consumers? Aha, now we have a 32% drop in breast cancer. So dairy milk is definitely not a health food, and it certainly shouldn't be part of the USDA's recommendations to consume 2 to 3 cups per day for every human in the United States, especially when you consider that 70% of the entire earth, 90% of Asians, 80% of African Americans, and American Indians are all lactose intolerant. This recommendation is not coming based out of scientific evidence, but rather from political and economic motivations promoted by the dairy lobby, among others. So soy it up and ditch the dairy.
Thank you, Dr. Kristi. That was a really lovely summary. And again, that really draws us quite nicely to Chuck and Dr. Neal Barnard, because they're going to be touching on a different kind of cancer.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about prostate cancer. And Dr. Barnard, would I be correct in assuming that just like the other forms of cancer that we've talked about here today, prostate cancer is very much linked to what it is that we're eating?
When I was in medical school, we thought if you just get older, you're going to get prostate cancer. I don't know if that's what you were taught, Gemma or Kristi. The whole idea was it's just an inevitability. About 1 in 8 men are actually getting that diagnosis. About 40% of them are under the age of 65 at the time they're diagnosed. But it turns out it is not all just in your genes or just in fate. Researchers have found that food makes a huge difference. Some are protective, some increase the risk.
And let's talk about dietary choices as a whole. When you look at somebody who's eating the standard American diet versus a plant-based diet, what do we know about the likelihood of cancer occurrence there?
Well, there was a big study, the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study at Harvard University. They brought in 47,000 men, and they tracked them over time. And what they found, that they constructed a scale for how plant-based they were. Now, let me be clear. These were not vegetarian or vegan folks for the most part. They were people eating more or less an American diet, but some much more toward plants, others much more toward Spam, pork chops, that kind of stuff. And what they found is that those who were more plant-based had a 16% drop in getting cancer at all of any severity, but they were 44% less likely to die of prostate cancer. So that was a good thing. Now, I would say let's look at people who are making bigger diet changes than that, really getting the animal products out, because all of these benefits were for the younger men, the men under the age of 65, whereas 60% of the cancers occur later than that. And there they didn't see the benefit of just this sort of modest changes. That said, we've got a lot of evidence that bigger changes will make a difference, Chuck.
And you know what I want to ask you about now is just a minute ago, Dr. Funk was talking about consuming 2 to 3 cups of dairy every single day. I'm curious, specific to prostate cancer, if somebody were to drink that 2 to 3 glasses of milk per day, what does that do to their risk of cancer?
Chuck, let me show you a quick diagram. Researchers looked at countries across the world, And they found that the more milk was consumed in your country, I'm looking out on the right, Sweden, Iceland, Switzerland, the higher the risk of prostate cancer. So that led researchers here in the United States to see, is that true here? This is the Physicians' Health Study, Harvard University, about 21,000 doctors, and those who consumed more milk, yep, higher prostate cancer risk. Another Harvard study, Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, which I mentioned earlier, they zeroed in on milk specifically, and there they found those people consuming the most milk, 60% increased risk in prostate cancer. You see the trend, more dairy, more prostate cancer. So there was a meta-analysis where you combine the results of lots of different studies, in this case 11, and they put it all together and said, if you're drinking even one portion of milk every day, your risk is going to be 43% higher than if you're not consuming milk at all. So bottom line, dump it out.
Which baffles my mind because if you look at my plate, the U.S. Dietary guidelines, essentially, there's a portion there for milk. It's kind of got its own little standalone section there for dairy, and you're showing us statistics here that really kind of go to the contrary, that milk should not be part of a healthy diet. It certainly does not do a body good. I'd love to circle back to that with you in a future episode, but I also want to ask you about a study that Dr. Dean Ornish did, a friend of ours here at the Physician Committee, where he looked at using a plant-based diet, a vegan diet, in terms of survival after being diagnosed with cancer. What do we know there?
Sure. First of all, I should mention that with regard to milk, we might have the smoking gun. It might be the IGF-1 that you heard Dr. Funk describing earlier. It causes cancer cells to grow, and that's true for breast cancer, also true for prostate cancer. But here's the study from Dr. Dean Ornish that you mentioned. At the Preventive Medicine Research Institute, Sausalito, California, 84 men, they all had prostate cancer. Half of them were randomly assigned to a control group, and meaning they didn't get any special diet treatment. And what you track is PSA, prostate-specific antigen. If it goes up, that means your cancer is probably spreading. And that's what happened. Over the course of about a year, PSA went up about 6%. And 6 of the 43 men in that group had to drop out and get operated on or get radiation. But the other men were assigned to a totally vegan diet, plant-based diet. Their PSA levels didn't rise. They didn't even hold steady. They were dropping a little bit by about 4% on average, which is exactly what you want. And there wasn't a single person in that group that needed any surgery or any kind of treatment for cancer for the duration of the study. So it looks really powerful when people put the diet to work, not just for prevention, but even after diagnosis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that looks about as promising as it could possibly get. I want to welcome my co-host with the most back to the show here, Dr. Gemma Newman. Here's something that I would love to speak with you and everybody else about, really. And that is what I've learned over the years hosting the exam room is that all of these cocktails that we have at a party or on a Friday night or at a ball game, in terms of our cancer risk, just like milk, we're not doing our body any good. When you're counseling patients on cancer, when you're talking to them about alcohol, what advice do you give?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Chuck. And I think when we look at alcohol and cancer risk, it is quite clear that unfortunately, alcohol is not great when it comes to cancer. As soon as the alcohol touches our lips, there's a metabolic process that happens where acetaldehyde is released, and that is unfortunately a carcinogenic compound. So there were huge studies on this where we looked at large populations of people and the amount of alcohol they drank. And unfortunately, the safest amount of alcohol to drink to reduce cancer risk is in fact 0. Now, that's not necessarily practical for everyone. It's such a shame in a way because it's such a universally used thing for celebrations and weddings and birthdays and funerals and pretty much every kind of occasion. People often like to drink alcohol, but in terms of cancer risk, it's not great. Even though people may be told that red wine is good for you, I assure you that probably having the red grapes is going to be better.
Yeah, and Dr. Funk, let me ask you this. I mean, you in your book, Breasts, the Owner's Manual, you have some really great conversations in there about alcohol. And you and I also have talked about mocktails on the exam room. So in terms of taking alcohol, out of somebody's glass and just replacing it still with something that's fun and you can still feel like you're enjoying the party. What kind of advice can you give us just from a practical standpoint there?
Yeah, so when you are at a party and everybody else is being festive, raising their glass of champagne, you can find something very sparkly, right? Like just a little bit of tart cherry juice with some lime soda, and it will also look just as festive. And here's the funny thing. The actual same champagne glass and that act of toasting, that mind body connection will exist inside of you just the same way. I mean, teetotalers are certainly not boring at parties, and neither will you be. So, one of my suggestions is to kind of mimic the look and fizziness or what have you of the drink, and then put it in the exact same sort of cocktail glass or tumbler or wine glass. And I think you will find that you're just filling your body with antioxidants instead of all of the carcinogens, and your smile will be just as bright.
And
Oh.
isn't that just the greatest? Like the thing that I love about Dr. Funk and so many of the guests that we've had on here with One Healthy World and on the podcast is that the doctors, you guys, you go to medical school, you learn all of this wonderful medical stuff, but then you also come heavy with the practical advice that we can all use. And just from everybody, for everybody who does not have a medical degree, I just want to take this moment to say thank you because you guys are doing just fantastic work. Um, Meg, let me ask you this. So you're the cancer survivor right now on the panel. Um, what kind of decisions do you make when you're at a party? How do you evaluate what's going to be best for you in that particular moment? How do you navigate those waters?
Yeah, I think I've never really been a big drinker, so it hasn't been a huge obstacle for me or a big challenge to overcome. I do recognize that it can be difficult for people to sort of want to fit in and want to join in the festivities, but much like what Dr. Funk was saying, you can still enjoy and still be with your friends and be with your family and have those similar experiences without consuming alcohol, and there are many ways to do that. You can have a flavored water, you can have kombucha, you can have, something a little different than what you usually have that's still kind of a treat or something fun, but it doesn't necessarily need to be alcohol.
And Dr. Barnard, let me ask you this. I think it might have been you and I who were having a conversation one time about maybe you had boarded a plane and they were selling maybe red wine that had a pink ribbon on it or something like that to support a breast cancer charity. And when you were telling me about this, I just kind of remember being kind of like gobsmacked. Like, why in the world could this possibly work? It just doesn't sound like a good idea. To me, it's like, Miller Lite, sponsoring an AA meeting. It just, the two don't compute there. Why is this
No.
message getting so marred and mixed?
Yeah, exactly. You'd go on, you get on the plane, you'd snuggle into your seat, and then you'd open up the in-flight magazine, and it would say, "Get the pink martini, $12, and a portion of your purchase will go for breast cancer research." And you think it's so crazy. Why not have the steak and the cheese omelet, and a portion of your money will go to try to do research on the disease that the foods are giving you. So we see this not just with alcohol, but we see it a lot with dietary things as well, where the dairy industry, the meat industry, these are good business people in the sense that they know how to get their products in front of people. And we have to be able to vote with our dollars in a healthier direction, I hope.
Thank you so much, Neal. I agree. And I think to sum things up, this has been such an informative episode. I think probably ending with some words from the World Cancer Research Fund, who've done extensive research into the ways that we can reduce our cancer risk. Dr. Funk talked about fruits and vegetables and herbs and spices. And obviously Dr. Barnard talked about, as well as Lisa Simon, talked about some of the foods that we should avoid or limit, red and processed meat and so on. Cutting back on alcohol is an absolute must if we can. No smoking if we can possibly avoid that as well. Maintaining a healthy weight and moving our bodies. I think if we can remember all of these things, we're going to be stood in really good stead, don't you think, Chuck?
No doubt about it. I think that that's all great advice for a healthy life all the way around. So fantastic stuff. I want to thank everybody for being here today and bringing a global look at health and reducing our risk for cancer. This has been an absolutely enthralling half hour. Thank you all.